We're going to hook up this G-TEC machine on here to do a cooler line flush on this 2015 Ford F-150. These adapters, right, the cooler lines actually plug into the side of the transmission here, and there's one bolt that holds your cable shroud cover on, and that's just a nut there, and then your bolt holds these lines into the transmission. So, and then on the other side of the transmission, I don't like to put too much torque on these cooler lines, so there's a bell housing bolt on the passenger side, a 13mm headed bell housing bolt. If you take that out, it gives you a lot more dance room on your transmission lines, so you don't wind up bending these to where it makes it real hard to get these to line back up. This is your bell housing bolt that I just took out of this hole right here, and this is your bracket that goes up on here to help support your transmission lines. So these things just aren't down here dancing around, which is cause fatigue on your line and break your lines. This is your adapter that would go on for the G-TEC machine to hook up to flush your cooler lines. So these just go up on here. This is what you got going on that come out of your transmission. This is your male fittings that actually push into the transmission. You got O-rings on here to seal your lines into your case of your transmission. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to pop this up on here, move our spring pin back to hold it in place, do that on both your couplers, and now we're hooked up ready to do the flush on this cooler assembly on this pickup truck. And this is the G-TEC machine that you have in a lot of your facilities now. But the main thing it is, when you get ready to use the G-TEC machine, always make sure that your machine is up to temperature. So basically you plug your machine into your 110 outlets. You just got to kind of be careful on your 110 outlets to make sure that you don't overload the circuit. If you plug in your pump motor and your heater, sometimes it will, if you don't shut your heater off and turn your motor on, sometimes it'll trip your breaker. But right now, if you zero in on this little thermostat right here, it tells you that our tank temperature right now is a touch over 140 degrees. You always want to make sure that your transmission fluid that's in the machine is up to temperature before you start your service. So what I'm going to do here is, this is the service hoses for the G-TEC machine that we hook up to the transmission lines on the pickup truck itself. So what I'll do is I'll remove this coupler right here, and these are free flow couplers. There is no dry lock on this, so that's the reason why we have this coupler joined together, so that the fluid that's in your line just isn't running onto the floor, because these do not have a dry lock fitting in them. So we'll go over here and then we'll hook up to the transmission lines. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to hook our flush lines up to the cooler lines on the vehicle. Now, one thing about this, when you're doing your transmission cooler line flush, usually your transmission's still not in the truck. So you've got a lot more open cavity here to work with, but this transmission's in good shape. I'm just going to flush the cooler here. So we hook our lines up to our fittings, and then we will start doing our flush here. Okay, what we're going to do now, we got our lines all hooked up to our cooler lines on the pickup truck. So what we're going to do here now is, I'm going to shut the heater off since we got our temperature up in good shape. That way you don't take a chance of blowing a breaker or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move our purge valve around to purge out the dirty fluid that's going to come out of our cooler lines. That way we won't wind up contaminating our 8 or 9 gallons of transmission fluid faster than what we need to in the machine. So I'll turn the pump on. One thing that I neglected to tell you is you have to have this valve in either position. No fluid will flow if it's in the neutral position, and it makes it very hard on the motor assembly in the G-TEC machine. So right now I purged the fluid out of the lines, so we'd be ready to start our flush. So in order to do our flush, close the ball valve on the end of your purge line so any fluid that's in this won't continue to run out onto the floor. And then just put this back up in the area there, held in place. One way or the other as far as your valve goes. Turn your valve back to the flush position and turn your pump motor back on. Right now we are flushing the cooler lines. We'll let this go for just a little bit. I think there's a specific time on that. I think maybe 5 minutes one way and then go back the other way. So what we'll do is here, we're just going to short this up just a little bit so I don't tie up too much of your time. But we got it flushing one way, and then what we're going to do is we're going to switch directions. So just sling this thing back over the other way, and that will reverse your lines so you're flushing back through the other way. Main thing to remember is always have your temperature up on your tank, because basically the heated transmission fluid melts the varnish that could be held up and holding particles in your cooler or in your transmission lines. The heated temperature of the fluid melts the varnish to where you make sure you get a nice clean flush out of the whole thing. Now what we're going to do here is you can agitate your lines a little bit. You hook air up to your machine here. You can agitate air into your system a little bit in case you want to try to help blow out your lines a little bit. If you got anything in there, you can agitate just a little bit with air. So that's your control to do that. Okay, we're going to get ready to disconnect from the pickup truck now. So what you can do here, you'll have air hooked up to your machine here. So what you can do is blow your cooler lines out on your pickup truck and the lines on the machine, so that when you disconnect from the adapters there, you won't have a big transmission fluid mess on the floor. So just crack your valve open just a little bit. Let that blow through. Shut it back off. And now your lines are cleared out to where when you disconnect, you won't have a big bleed on your floor, onto you, or whatever you're doing there. So just got to make sure that whenever you get ready to blow this out, make sure that your valve is not in the neutral position. Make sure it's in 1 or 2 position here to where you can actually circulate through this, because if it's in a neutral position, it shuts the flow off to these hoses. So just always remember, when you get ready to use this machine, even when you start doing your flush, always remember that your valve here is in 1 or 2. Never have it in a neutral position. If you got it in a neutral position, you're deadheading the pump and it's hard on the motor. You'll burn the motor. Once you get done with your flush on this, after you run your machine for about 15 minutes on your flush, your Oberg filter is where your debris will go. So you just spin your wing nut off and crack this apart, and your screen will have your debris from what you flushed out of your cooler. If you have debris here, the best thing to do would be to clean your screen off, put it back in, and do another service on it. And then check your Oberg filter after your next service. Make sure you don't have any debris on your filter here. And if you don't have any debris on your filter, then your flush is adequate. Just make sure that when you put your Oberg filter back in, that it seats down into the groove so that you don't crush your rubber on the edge of your Oberg filter, either the outer ring or the inner ring, and then put it back together. You can kind of feel if it seats into your rings, and then put your wing nut back on. And like I say, you do this until you see no more debris coming out when you're doing your cooler line flush and your cooler flush. Just remember, when you just get ready to disconnect these, even though we blew the lines out, you'll still have a little bit of residual fluid drop. Just remember that these are not dry lock fittings. These are free-flowing, straight flow fittings, so that you don't pack debris in the end of your dry locks here. So just always make sure you couple these lines back together once you get ready to disconnect your machine. So if you do have any residual fluid, which you will have runoff in your line, then it won't run off in the floor. So that's the way you should put your machine back when you put it away, is just like this. So when we get ready to take our fittings off, these are the spring clips that have held these fittings on. So in order to get the fittings released, all you have to do is just push forward on your spring clips and pull these loose. Just as easy as that.